Hi there, I'm Tom Graham from Avid Audio, and with me is a longtime friend and an Emmy-winning re-recording mixer, Mr. Scott Weber. Scott, thanks for being here and sharing some cool post-mixing tips.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me, Tom.
That's great. So Scott has worked on such big hit TV shows as Lost, Person of Interest, Alcatraz, and Tron Uprising. He was also kind enough to partner with me and supervise and mix a fun little short film a few years back called Agent MX0, which you can watch in its entirety on YouTube, as well as several other videos and a full webinar where we talk about making the movie and the complete sound process. The main purpose of the movie was to have demo material that we could use to show you Pro Tools in action.
That's right, and you know, it's really turned out to be good demo material that I've used in teaching classes and in places where I've been able to speak.
Yeah, and we originally mixed the movie on Pro Tools HD with Icon D-Controls at the time, and have brought a super session together here on a Pro Tools HD native rig to show you some of these post-focus mixing possibilities with the new S3 control surface.
That's right, and so I've gone through this session and I've picked out some examples of session management and some mixing examples that we can use for mixing different things like dialogue, music, and sound effects.
That's cool. I can't wait to dive in.
Sounds good. All right, let's do it.
All right, so let's get started, and there's no better place to start than session management, because really, when you're mixing a movie, even on this short feature film, or short film, we had over 200 tracks.
That's right, and well, what we've done, this actually originally was a dialogue session and a sound effects session and backgrounds and music. They were all separate.
Right.
And sort of in the evolution of Pro Tools, where we can play a bunch of tracks, we put this all into one big super session. So that's a great thing, you can play all the tracks, but it's also hard to sort of manage all these tracks. So if you look at our screen here, and we start at the top and see all the dialogue tracks, and we see all of our music tracks, and go down to our sound effects and backgrounds and Foley and masters, there's a lot of tracks to get to. So we really have to have a way of organizing them in such a way that it's easy to get at those tracks so that when we're mixing, we can dive in and mix those easily.
All right, well, let's pop over to the mix window then, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, you and I were kind of sharing sessions a lot in editorial. Now, on your TV show that you work on, you have a team of editors, and you lay out a template.
That's right. So what I'll do is I'll set up a way that I like to mix, and then I'll send them a template, and they'll cut within that template, and even naming so that when I go to import their session data into my session, it falls right into place. And if you look at the what I have on screen here, you can see I've color-coded groups of tracks. And I've actually made mixed groups of those things. You'll see I have groups of 6 effects tracks, so there's 4 monos and 2 stereos, and you'll see another 4 monos and 2 stereos. Well, those are all basically little submixes of sound effects. So if my editor is cutting a car chase, he might put all the engine sounds on the first 6 tracks, and he might put the skids on the next set of tracks, and he might put the first guy's gunshots on another set of tracks. And those all correspond to the groups which are assigned to a VCA master. So each one of these groups of tracks is a single VCA master. So I can manage 80 tracks of sound effects, and I can have 8 or 10 VCA masters control the whole thing.
Right, so whatever blend is happening in those first 6 tracks, that automation can then be controlled by the VCA master.
That's correct. So
we should mention again, and we did before, but this is a Pro Tools HD native system. So the software gives us surround panning, and VCA masters is one of those really important features that we utilize.
That's right.
We are monitoring in stereo for the video.
That's right.
Let's take a look at color coding. Can you bring up the color palette, Scott, in the software, and just show everybody that's a really important part of visually helping you separate these tracks. And I can see here those same color codes on the surface, the light blue, the darker blue, but I'm noticing, to me, starting with FX13, that the color shading is just a little bit close. Perhaps we could change
Why don't we change effects 7 through 12 here? So I'm gonna highlight those tracks there, and we can go in here and make sure that we're selected the tracks here. Let's make it more of a green color. So let's just make it green.
Got it.
And now all of a sudden, visually on the screen and also on the surface, you can see that on the strip here, we can see those colors come up on the surface. So it's easy to see where those groups, the start and end, are.
All right. So we've got some color coding going. You've already pre-built and laid out the channels the way you want.
Mm-hmm.
And I also notice you have pretty much a really good setup of EQ or dynamics and sends and routing to subwoofers as sends. And I notice some of them are inactive. Just give me a brief description of why that is.
Well, part of the problem with running so many tracks is you're going to run out of resources. So what I typically do is I start my mix. A lot of the plugins and the sends are inactive, and I only make them active when I use them.
Okay.
And that ends up saving a lot of resources so you can run more tracks and not use those up on having everything active all the time.
Okay, great. So we've kind of covered the basic setup here. Now, managing this many tracks on a 16 fader surface, let's talk about memory location, sort of as the old school way.
That's right. Now, back in the day when we were mixing on a Pro Control and even on a Command 8 or a lot of the different Avid surfaces through the years, I used to do a lot more using memory show hides to manage tracks. Well, let's set some of those up and show you sort of that works, because I think that's one of the quickest and easiest ways to manage tracks so that you can, even if you're not familiar with the surface, you can get to the tracks you want to get to real quickly.
Okay.
So let's do that real quick. Let's set up a memory location for show hide for the dialogue tracks. So I'm going to go over here to the right side of my track management here. You can see on the right side where all the tracks are. If I hold the Option key down and I click on one of them, it gets rid of all those tracks. I don't have anything on the surface now. But as I click and drag across those, I'm choosing what tracks I want to show. So I want to show all my source dialogue tracks. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to show my ADR tracks.
All the way FUTs and your chains and your routing. So these would be the chains would be aux faders that are set up that you can route to all the source tracks and have processing on.
That's right. They would be master compression or master EQ or maybe master reverb that I might want to send for either ADR or production dialogue or whatever.
Okay.
So I've just selected the tracks that I want to see. Let's go back to our full view here.
Let's bring up the memory location.
Sure. So here's our memory location window here, and I'm going to zoom in here real quick so you can see that a little better. And what I'm going to do here is, let me zoom back out again. What I'm going to do, if I hit the Enter button, this gives me the opportunity to not only add a location, but what I'm going to do here, since we want to do a show and hide, we want to select no time properties because we don't care where it locates. We're going to select that we want those tracks to be shown, and we're going to save the zoom setting and the track height as well. So it'll look exactly how I just saw that.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and name it. That'll be DX tracks. Now I've already put it in there, so we're not going to redo it again.
Right.
So you'll see on my memory location here that I have the dialogue track selected there.
Right. So when you now want to recall those, you can do it from the numeric keypad.
I can, and if you do dot to dot, that gives me that memory location, which is a show hide for dialogue. I want to go to the effects track. Let's go to memory location 3, which will be dot 3 dot. And now you see that at the top of my session, it's showing up. That's what I'm seeing in my session. And what it's also done, it's also brought those up on the surface.
Okay.
So my background track, same thing. If I go to my background tracks, it brings to the top of session.
And now let's just navigate through the backgrounds here using the banking on the surface, right?
Sure. So I could either bank to the set of tracks, and since I don't have very many, I have less than 32, so it's only 2 banks.
Right.
But I can get back and forth to the amount of faders that are on the surface right now.
So that's really a powerful, quick way.
It is a powerful and quick way to do things. Let's show all tracks one more time again, which is dot 1 dot. It's my memory location 1. Now something that the S3 gives you the ability to do is whatever track you select in Pro Tools, it ends up bringing that fader up on the surface to the first position.
Okay.
So to me, that's another powerful way to navigate. The other thing I have on here is I also have in my session link, track, and edit selection. That's something I like to use because I like to select the track at the same time. So if I click on my session, you notice how it highlights effects number 8 there.
And it brought it up on the surface to the first position.
That's correct. And what that also does on the S3 surface, not only does it bring it up on the first fader, but it selects it or attentions the track, which is the term we use with Yukon, And that gives me the ability to call up the equalization or the sends or everything attached to that particular fader.
Yeah, that's great. So it's a real quick way to focus the fader or attention the fader, get to any of the EQ or dynamics, and select the spot where you're going to play from.
That's right, without having to try to push a bunch of buttons where you're going. It's a real powerful tool. If I go back up here to the dialogue session and I want to go to this dialogue track, if I click on that track, it attentions that track, and I can real easily go over and I can just push the EQ button, and I have the EQ for that fader up on the surface rather quickly.
That's great. All right, we're going to give you one more session management tip.
Okay.
And this one's a little more in depth. It's using layouts with the surface, right?
That's right. And that's something that it's a very powerful tool on the bigger consoles, like on the Icon or on the S6, where you can create layers of tracks or custom faders like we did on the Icon, so that you can build things that you want to use on the surface.
All right, well, let's build a couple and just sort of see how that goes. Basically, behind Pro Tools is an app running called uControl.
That's right.
And you're going to go ahead and build several layouts, kind of the way you've already built some.
That's right. We're gonna build the first three together, just so you can sort of see how that's done.
Yeah.
And the first one I want to do is I want to have somewhere to go back to. I want to go back to 0. I want to go back to all tracks. And so what I'm going to do, when I click on a track, it brings it to the first fader.
Right.
Well, I want to have the first fader, my first track in my session
Of dialogue.
So right. I'm gonna click in that spot over there, and I'm going to go over here to my Yukon layer. And I'm going to select the first position, and I'm going to hit store. And let's just call it something. And all I'm going to call it, real simply, is just all.
Now, how do you know what's in that group that you just stored?
Well, if we go over to the next tab, which is assign, it shows me, right now it's on auto assign. And auto assign basically is whatever you happen to select on the surface is what's going to end up over here.
In that first fader position.
In that first fader position.
It remembers it, basically.
That's right. So let's just go back over to the surface again, and let's go down over here and just click somewhere in our background tracks. It comes up to here. Now, this bank over on the left-hand side of the surface is where my layouts, I can recall my layouts.
Okay.
So if I recall the first layout, the A layout, and push that, it's going to take me and put that first dialogue track back right up to the top of the surface.
Okay. So essentially, the all layout that you made is auto-assigned, but it has every fader in the session, every channel in the session available to you.
That's right. So now I can just go through and I can bang through and select the one I want.
Okay.
Now, the next one I want to do is one specifically for mixing the dialogue. And what I want to do on this one, and I want to create some faders that are going to be specifically assigned to faders and not move.
Locked out.
I'm going to lock those to specific faders. And with the dialogue mix, I want to have some of my chains, some of my reverbs, and my delay so that they don't move. They're just stationary in my session. And then I'm going to leave the rest of the faders in auto-assign so that I can bank through the rest of my dialogue. So let's do that real quick.
Okay.
The first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to, again, I'm going to deselect everything. And all I'm going to select, I'm going to get my first 3 dialogue chains. I'm going to get my my reverbs and my delay.
Okay.
And that's all I'm going to put on here right now. And let's go over to my Yukon layer.
Okay, let's zoom in on that just so
Okay.
that's real obvious what you're doing. And again, by you showing and hiding, this is just a tip to speed things up a bit, correct?
That's right. If I hadn't have shown and hide it, when I go over here to select the tracks I want, I would end up with seeing the whole session worth of tracks.
Okay, so we want the delay or the last one.
I'm gonna start from the back. So I'm
Okay.
gonna put my my delay
Okay.
lock assigned to the last fader. Then we're gonna put my verb 3,
Okay. We can probably zoom back out now
Verb
that you see what's
2.
going on.
verb 1.
Right?
There's my third chain, my second chain, and my first chain. I'm going to bump back over to Pro Tools for a second here, and I'm going to show all the tracks again.
Okay.
Because remember, the rest of the tracks can be auto-assigned. And whatever track I select as the first track is what's going to end up in my layout.
Okay.
So let's go back over to my layouts, and I'm going to store that into the second one.
Okay.
And I'm going to call this DX mix.
All right, so essentially what you've done, if we go to the overhead view of the board, is these faders are the chains. So all of these source tracks feed the chains and the verbs and the delay.
That's right.
And you can now bank these channels?
Well, since they're in auto assign, anywhere I click, whatever I select within the session will end up on these faders here, or I can bank through those tracks. And it's only banking through these 9 faders because I've locked these other ones in locked positions of the things I want to keep while I'm mixing my dialogue.
That's a great tip. All right, and you said you wanted to build one more of a similar way. That would be the effects?
I want to build my effects mix tracks as well. So let's go over here, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm just going to show the tracks, my change from my effects. So I'm going to, let's hide everything again, and let's go down here. And on this one, I want my 5-channel chain, my verbs delay, and let's just show my first sub track there. So I have those shown. I'm going to go back over to the Yukon layer, and I'm going to assign those to...
And the sub would be for your LFE channel.
That's correct. And so we're not really going to hear that today while we're mixing our in stereo, but that's one of the things I would use if I was mixing a 5.1.
Right.
And we want the rest of these to be an auto assign. That's left over from the other thing we did there. But now we have auto assign for the first 11, and then I have my chains and my 2 verbs on the back one. So
in order to go back, now you have to go back to Pro Tools.
I need to show all the tracks again because I want, now what I want is I want my, the first track that I call up on that layout to be my effects. So I'm going to select that first track.
Got it.
And now when I go back over here and I store that layout, I'm going to call that effects mix.
Right. Okay.
That's going to show it there. So let's, just for fun, let's go back over to the surface now.
And we have 6 different layout recall buttons and a shift layer.
That's right. So in essence, you have 12 layouts readily available to you. And you also actually have 48 because I could go back over here. I can recall those from the Yukon app as well.
Okay.
So if you scroll down here, you can see, I've even saved some down lower. You have 48 full ones available. And on the surface, you know, we have 12 available.
And that might be interesting if you wanted your VCA masters from your dialogue and your music to play against each other. They may not be in order. You could build them and lay them out.
Or you might set some that you wouldn't use all the time, but you'd save them off on other layers that would be useful to be using. But the ones that I use all the time, I would set those up on the first 12.
And so the difference from memory show hide versus layouts is if we want to recall that effects version that you just built, is that number C? The screen doesn't change, but yet we can still have the faders.
This is basically these layouts is what's happening with the faders. This is what we're mixing on. It's not really affecting what's on the screen.
Right.
Where the show hide is more what's going on, what you're visually seeing.
Cool. Well, I think these are some great tips to use the S3 and sort of build your session really to get ready to mix. In the next section, let's dive in and do some mixing.
That sounds great.